Hey everybody, I'm Scott Weichel. You're listening to My Kind of Country on MKOCRadio.com. Every so often I receive music in the mail, and I received a CD a couple weeks ago, and it's called Swing Town. And the gentleman on there, his name is Cowboy Joe. And I wasn't familiar with the name when I first saw it. And then I opened up the cover and I read the inside, and come to find out that this gentleman has recorded and sang on over 12,000 country songs and 184 number one hits. You've seen him on Hee Haw, and he's done it all, folks. And it's a pleasure to have him on the show today. And we're going to talk about his career and his new album. This is Cowboy Joe Babcock. Cowboy, how are you today?
Yes, great, Scott. Thank you for calling, and thank you for the spins. We really appreciate it.
Well, I absolutely love your new album, and I want to thank you for getting in touch with me and sending it to me. That's it's a wonderful thing.
Well, we can't do it without you guys. Gotta have it's got to be heard by the good folks out there for us to do anything. But I really enjoyed putting this album together. I love Western swing because it's a genre that you can put any chord in there that you want to. It's really most of them are country songs put to a sort of a Western swing beat, But and you can deal with any subject in Western swing. It can be sad, it can be happy. Even the sad songs, we put them to a lilt to the beat, that you can dance to, and it's sort of, this may be a sad time in my life, but let's go dance.
There you go.
So that's why I love it. I love Western swing, traditional country, and cowboy music. Those are my favorites.
Well, you've knocked it out of the park on this collection, and you have written every song on here with the exception of one, and that was a gospel song that you co-wrote with Jim Glazier.
Jim Glazier, yeah. Jim helped me on that, and I've just got a backlog of a lot of songs that I'm trying to archive and get cut. So I usually I try to put a couple of standards in, especially maybe a couple of Bob Wills tunes or something. But on this one, I just stuck with my original material. Hopefully I've got something in there that maybe that stands out. And matter of fact, Scott, if your listeners, they're the ones that'll decide if we've got a hit in there. And I'd be really interested in the listener response, to see if we've got one or two songs in there that sort of stand out. And I'd be interested in your response too, because I've lived with this thing so long that I can't tell. I couldn't tell if it's a hit in there or not. When I wrote "I Washed My Hands in Muddy Water," I didn't know that was a hit. I thought I could write 100 of those, in the next month, and been trying ever since.
That's the way it goes sometimes. Well, folks, let us know. Get in touch with us through our website or our Facebook page, and let us know when you hear these songs from Swingtown, Cowboy Joe, and let us know what you like on the album. We'll pass on the information for sure. And
I love that. Yeah.
Cowboy, you mentioned "Wash My Hands in Muddy Water." That has become a country music standard. Of course, the great Stonewall Jackson had a big hit with it, as well as Charlie Rich, Elvis Presley. It's been recorded by a bunch of people. That's a monster song.
Well, you've done your homework. Yeah. Johnny Rivers had a rock and roll hit on it, and Elvis Presley cut it, and we recorded. I recorded with Elvis Presley with the Nashville Edition, my group, the Nashville Edition. And when the night we were recording with Elvis, we weren't supposed to talk to him very much. We weren't supposed to bother him much, But I got up my nerve and went over there, and I wanted to thank him for cutting the "Wash My Hands in Muddy Water." So I got up my nerve and I went over and he was talking to a couple of the girls. He was enamored with the Holiday Sisters that were also on the session. And so I said, Mr. Presley, I want to thank you for cutting my song, "I Washed My Hands in Muddy Water." And he looked up and gave me that little sort of crooked grin and said, "Okay, man, That was my conversation with Elvis.
That was it.
That was it.
That's great.
He had more important things to do, but anyway, he was really good to work with. He was a real gentleman, and he was all business. He listened to those songs, and a lot of times he didn't decide on the song until that night of the session. He'd be listening to demo songs, and although some of them were arranged, some of them were decided beforehand, but he was a real gentleman to work with. Knew his songs, and he was real good to work with. He was real good to us.
That's incredible. Well, folks, if you haven't caught on to this by now, the Nashville edition, if you turn on RFD TV or any of the channels that have some of the old hee-haw shows, you're going to see this quartet of people on there that was founded by Joe Babcock, who we're talking with today, and they have performed and sang on over 10,000 different recordings in not only country music but in rock and roll music, and they were kind of the go-to group for background harmonies, and for many years, and you guys were on the entire run of the Hee Haw show as well, right?
We were. I was on the entire run. I think we ran 24 years, and of course we're still on. We're still on RFD, and I believe, Scott, this is our 50th year of continually television. I think we started in 1968.
Wow.
And been on for 50 years, that show. It's sort of a cartoon with real people.
That's incredible.
People ask me, about hee-haw and why it was so successful. And, I think of a story that Gordy Tapp told me. He was flying in to Nashville one time, about 6 o'clock Nashville time, and he saw the lights of the city down there. And he thought to himself, there's a lot of people down there, 1 million people that are going to tune in to hee-haw. Now, they may have had a bad week. They may have had financial problems, maybe health problems. Life goes on. But he said, they're going to tune in to hee-haw, and we're going to take them to Cornfield County, where the girls are all pretty, the boys are all funny, and we laugh at our troubles. And for a little while, they're going to forget their troubles. So we're going to take them away from them. And that's sort of what hee-haw was. We had pretty girls, we had great music, we had a great band. And we ended up with a gospel song. I can tell you a story about that, too. And so it was a great show, and I guess that would be considered, in the music business, it would be considered the dream job. I got to be surrounded by beautiful girls and wonderful music and musicians, and got to go home, sleep in my own bed at night.
There you go. Can't ask for more than that, right?
I can't beat that. I've been very blessed.
Absolutely.
Very blessed.
Absolutely. Wonderful group. I know Dolores Edgen and Ricky Page. And,
that's right.
Herschel
Wigginton.
Yeah, man. He passed away here just a couple years ago. Is that right?
Yes, Dolores and Herschel and my other soprano singer Wendy have all passed away. Ricky and I are the only ones that are left.
Oh, okay.
But it was a wonderful show. I'll tell you a little story about the gospel music. Sam Lavello, our producer, was a Christian man, and we wanted to end the show with a gospel song. That was always sort of traditional among country shows, end with the gospel song. And so we wanted to do that, but the big boys wouldn't let us do it. They said, "No, this is comedy. We don't want to make a gospel show out of this." Well, we finally prevailed upon them, and they said, "You can put one gospel song on there as long as you don't mention the name Jesus." Well, I don't know what a gospel song is without the Savior, but we did one song, and I forget what the song was. Lulu, I arranged it, and Lulu Roman did the gospel song, and it received so much response that from that time on they backed down, and we ended every show with a gospel song from then on. I also sang, with the Hee Haw Gospel Quartet after Buck Owens left the show.
Right.
And so that was a real joy too. And I also sang with the group that I started, the Hee Haw Cowboy Quartet, which was my salute to my heroes, the Sons of the Pioneers, and some of the old time Western cowboy groups. So it was a wonderful job, and I was very blessed to be able to get that. We took that job back in 1968 we told Sam, we didn't know what Hee Haw was or anything. It was just another television show. And we said, we'll take this show, Sam, as long as it doesn't interfere with our sessions, because we were doing a lot of sessions back in those days. We sang with Ronnie Millsap and Charlie Pride and Merle Haggard and all the big guys, and we didn't want it to interfere with our session business, and so he worked around us, and he'd bring us in when we didn't have sessions. We did the show with Hee Haw, but it turned out to be a wonderful show, and was the premier country music show for many years.
Yes, it certainly was. Well, and it was a nice platform for you. You guys got a lot of recognition. I know that there were times on there when you were featured, and you guys, as a quartet, sang a song. And then, of course, you mentioned the gospel music, and the Hee Haw Gospel Quartet became a huge entity on its own. There were CDs out and videos out, and that became an incredible thing. And I do a Sunday gospel show, and I play a lot of the gospel quartet stuff on my show. And then
okay, yeah, well, I'll be on some of them.
Yeah, I do remember you being on there.
The original quartet was Buck and Roy and Grandpa and Kenny Price.
Yeah.
And Kenny Price passed away, and we substituted Tennessee Ernie Ford sang bass with us for a year or two, and then I joined the group, and then my bass singer Ray Burdett joined the group for a while, and but it was Grandpa Jones created that quartet.
Did he?
Yeah, Grandpa Jones. He it was his idea, and he contributed a lot of those old time country hymns to the quartet, and the old time country hymns were so popular as done by the quartet, and it was different. And Grandpa had a quartet earlier that sang those old songs. I think Merle Travis and maybe a couple of the Delmore brothers. No, Wayne Ramey, I think, was in it. And he had a quartet many years ago, and he sort of duplicated that old-time quartet and created the Hee Haw Gospel Quartet. And yes, it became very popular.
Absolutely.
Yeah. People loved it.
Well, on your new album, you've got a couple gospel songs on there, and one of the songs is called "The Lord Loves Western Swing."
Yeah. Well, I think the Lord does. The Lord gave us the gift of music. It's all from the Lord, and David might have been considered the first country singer. I mean, he had a guitar, he played the lyra, played a string instrument, and he also loved to dance. And there you go, Western swing. He loved to dance. And the Lord loved David. David was a special person in the Bible. The genealogy of Christ leads back to David. And so I thought, well, it'd be sort of fun to write a song, "The Lord Loves Western Swing."
Amen to that. Well, I know that you kind of got your start in music with Marty Robbins and Tom Paul and the Glazer Brothers, and you've got a song on this CD that you co-wrote, also a gospel song with Jim Glazer.
That's right. Jim has always been a wonderful friend of mine. And, Jim sang the tenor line on El Paso.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that was Jim Glazer on tenor and Bobby Sykes on baritone and Marty. And to my way of thinking, and to a lot of other people, the recording of El Paso may have been the greatest recording ever done, because it's so simple. Jim and Bobby, and Marty on the vocals, Grady Martin on that wonderful guitar, and a rhythm guitar, and I don't even know if they had drums on it, but just 4 or 5 people created one of the greatest recordings of all time. The way that chorus soars up into those high notes with Jim hitting that high A, full voice. It's just a marvelous recording. And I don't know if Jim ever got the recognition that he should have, but that's one of the greatest recordings ever created.
I totally agree with you. I interviewed Jim on my show a couple years ago, and he's still got a phenomenal voice. I mean, he's been on Country's Family Reunion.
Voices, yeah.
Oh man.
But I treasure my years with Marty. When I first started out with Marty, we traveled in 2 station wagons. We did our own driving. We'd finish up a show, 10 or 11, 12 o'clock at night, go get something to eat, get in those station wagons and drive all night. Usually we had 400 to 500 miles between dates. And back then, there weren't all that many freeways. We'd drive 10 or 12, 14 hours, get into a hotel at 9 or 10 in the morning, get a little sleep, eat a bite, rest a little in the afternoon, do a show, and then get in those cars and drive all night, do the same thing again. And it was a rough life, but we were young and enjoyed it. And Marty, of course, was my mentor for writing, and he was very good to me. He cut 17 or 18 of my songs, and I recorded one of them in this new album, If You See My Heart Today. That's Marty cut the original record on that.
Okay. Well, that's one of my standout cuts on the album. I really like that song a whole lot. That one really got to me, and I think the other one that I really keep kind of gravitating, there's I have to listen to an album for a while and kind of come back to it, but the one I kind of been gravitating toward is Why Did I Ever Leave My Happy Home?
Why did I ever leave my happy home? That's true story for me. I've been broke down out on the road and wondered, why am I doing this?
Yeah.
Why am I doing it? Broke down, and wondering if you're even going to make the date.
I can relate.
Yeah.
I did that end of it for many years myself, so I can relate to that one. But I think that's a very special song. And, folks, I do want to let you know the album Swingtown is available at cdbaby.com, Amazon, and iTunes. We'll put all that information on our Facebook page. And you can read more about Cowboy Joe's career at cowboyjoeandthebabcocks.com. And Cowboy Joe Babcock's music there. He has another album called Trail Jazz. And you've got some great music there in addition to the new album. So check out that website, and we'll make sure we have that on our page as well. And Joe, you also did you've won quite a few gospel awards too. We were talking about gospel music with the Babcocks, which was your wife Carol and your daughter Lori.
Yes, we were quite active. We worked as a group, Cowboy Joe and the Babcocks, and we recorded country music also. And my daughter Lori is a wonderful singer. We're not doing too much right now. I'm sort of concentrating on the Western swing, but we did have a #1 record with the Brand of the Cross and several charting numbers, and we hit that old gospel trail pretty hard for a while there, sang in a lot of churches and
Sure.
did a lot of the festivals, and We haven't quit that, but I'm just concentrating on the cowboy music and the western swing for a little while.
Well, you've done a stellar job on this album, and the production and the sound quality is outstanding. Hilltop Studios, of course, one of the greatest studios in Nashville, as far as I'm concerned. But I'll tell you what, the musicians on here, folks, anybody that's, if you're into old country music and you pay attention to things like this, you've got a virtual who's who of musicians on here. And if you start pulling out your old albums and start flipping them over and checking the musicians, you're going to see these names appear on a lot of these albums. I'm talking, of course, Hargus Pig Robbins on piano. I had a chance to meet him about a year ago. That was such a cool thing. And your fiddle section really intrigued me. You've got some pretty heavyweights. Jim Buchanan, I met him when he was touring with George Jones.
Yep.
And then,
and with Mel Tillis.
And Mel Tillis, yep. Tiger Bell, I actually met him. He was just a kid back in the 70s, and he was on the road with Merle Haggard. And he was just a little kid, and he turned into such a wonderful musician. You've got him. And, of course, Glenn Duncan. My gosh, he has played on so many great hit records. And Tommy Williams. I mean, this is just in the fiddles here. You got a stellar group right there.
Yeah, they are. And, Glenn Duncan did The Ghost of Bob Wills for me.
Yeah.
On a couple of songs, he imitated Bob Wills.
Yeah.
And that was a lot of fun for me, especially on the first song, Swing On Down Swingtown. He's the ghost of Bob Wills, and he sounds just like Bob Wills.
He did, and I love that. Merle Haggard, some years ago, Billy Mize had done a tribute album to Bob Wills, and went back in the studio with Haggard, and Haggard did that same thing. Throughout the album, he went back and kind of added the ahas in there, and all the Bob Wills stuff, and I thought that was really cool. So it was cool to hear that on your project.
Well, I'm a great admirer of Bob Wills. He was the pioneer. He sort of started this off, the western swing, and I got to meet Bob Wills. Actually, we worked a few shows with him back when I was with Marty.
Did you really?
I did. We worked some clubs, and he and the Texas Playboys. And I got to meet Bob Wills one time at the studio. He was coming out from Columbia, and I was going in. And just got to meet him, shake his hand. He was very cordial, very nice man. But I never got to sing with him. I just would have given anything if I could have sung with the Texas Playboys.
Oh, man, that would have been cool. I noticed you're playing an Eldon Shamblin guitar on all these tracks, and, of course, Eldon Shamblin was a founding member of the Texas Playboys and worked for many years in Merle Haggard's Strangers as well.
Yes. Well, see, that's another one. I've always been an admirer of Eldon Shamblin, those bass runs, those pretty things that he did. And it's my understanding that he did a few of those runs one time, and Bob asked him to start doing that a lot because back in those days, the string bass back in the back there probably was not electrified, and many times did not go too far out into the audience. Maybe the audience couldn't hear the big string bass very good. And so Bob liked to have Eldon sort of amplify those bass runs and sort of add to the bass, to my way of thinking, is half the band.
Yeah.
The bass, string bass, is the only one that the bottom register, like, other than the piano, is covered by that bass. And so Eldon added those little runs, and Bob liked it and told him to start doing that a lot. And so that sort of became a signature part of the Playboys, of their sound. And I've always loved that, so I've tried to learn those chords and duplicate them so that I can carry on the tradition of Eldon Shamblin.
Well, you've done a wonderful job at it, no doubt about it. And, the guitars on this album, Doug Jernigan plays steel guitar, of course, a Steel Guitar Hall of Famer there. And the great Jimmy Capps is on guitar on this album, and he has just released a book, and he's going to be on our show soon. I'm very much a big admirer of Jimmy Capps.
He's a wonderful man. He's also a great producer. Jimmy is so creative. very creative. And also on a couple of songs, I've got Andy Reese on guitar. He's with the Time Jumpers.
Oh, wow.
So I do have a stellar,
Yes, you do.
call it a stellar band of musicians. I've always admired the musicians as much as the singers. When I was a boy, growing up and listening to country music, I listened to the guitar parts and the fiddles and everything. I love the musicianship as much as the singers. And matter of fact, when I came to Nashville, I thought I was a guitar player. And I wasn't too bad. Back in Nebraska, I played some swing band stuff back there. But when I got to Nashville and heard what Hank Garland and Grady Martin and some of these guys were doing on guitar, I knew I had to find something else to do because they were so fantastic. So, but I found out that I could sing parts. I could hear parts, and I thought anybody could do that. I thought anybody could sing those parts, but I could do that pretty good, and started the Nashville Edition, and that's how I got started in vocal backing in Nashville.
That's a highly impressive resume that you have, without a doubt, and I'm in awe. I've always been a person who pays very close attention to musicians and who's playing on the albums and who writes the songs. And it's kind of like we were talking about Jimmy Capps. His book is called "The Man Behind," and it's kind of very apropos, because the people that back the stars are the ones that really make the stars, as far as I'm concerned. Both the musicians and the singers.
They do. That's right. They're very important.
Absolutely.
And I was just blessed to have so many great musicians living right here in Nashville. There's a lot of good musicians all over the country, but some of the best are right here in Nashville.
I agree with you. I've gotten to meet a lot of them and work with some of them, and then hear them perform, and I totally agree with you. Just like I said, this album that you've got is just absolutely stellar, with all these wonderful musicians. And
thank you very much.
And it's called Swing Town. It's available at Amazon, CD Baby, iTunes, all those places. We'll have links on our Facebook page, and you can also visit Cowboy Joe at his website, Cowboy Joe and the Babcocks.com, and we're going to play some of these great songs from this album for you, and we'll be continuing to play these. And again, as Cowboy mentioned at the beginning of the show, let us know what you think of the songs. If there's one that really stands out for you, and we'll pass that information on along for sure. And Cowboy, I want to ask you another question, and hopefully I'd love to have you back on the show sometime, because I think we've just kind of scratched the surface of your career. I hope maybe you'll take time and do that. But I was a very dear friend of Freddie Hart, and I was reading through some of the bio stuff, and you in the Nashville edition sang on Easy Lovin' and a whole bunch of Freddie's hits. I was just kind of wondering if you had a story about Freddie Hart.
Well, yes, Freddie was a fine gentleman, and he was very humble. He was I don't know if you know it, but Freddie had a black belt in karate.
Yes.
I mean, he didn't want to fool with Freddie, but he was the nicest gentleman you'd ever see. I don't know if he ever had to use that talent, but he he was a big man. He was very strong, lean, and he had a black belt. The worst thing he would say to you would be, don't believe I'd have said that, good buddy. Don't believe I'd have said that. That was his rebuttal. If he didn't ever say anything mean.
No.
But we did do many of his hits, probably most of them, and one of them was Easy Lovin'. The big one probably was Easy Lovin'. And on that, Herschel sang doubled Ricky's part up on the high part. Easy Lovin'. He doubled a high part in falsetto.
Okay.
And we sort of had a different sound on that song, I think. It gave a little bit of ethereal sound to it. I did the arrangements for the group. I wrote out the charts for the Nashville edition, and did it all by numbers, you know. And in Nashville, you have to be able to sing by ear, and you have to be able to sing by the number system.
Right.
And
right.
that is a system by which you write the chords out. I write the chords out in Roman numerals, and then I wrote the parts out, the individual parts out in scale steps. So my arrangements look like a complicated equation of some kind sometimes, but the group learned to read them, and we could read numbers quicker, faster than we could read notes. And the best thing about the number system is that if you change keys, like a C is a little low and you want to go up to D, the number system still works. You don't have to rewrite the arrangement. It's all relative to that number, because the one chord in C is the C chord. It's the root of the chord. Mm-hmm. And so it all translates into any key that you want. So I wrote the arrangements for the group, and that Easy Lovin' sort of had a different sound to it. I think that was probably his biggest song, but it was a good one.
It certainly was. And you have two of the musicians from that session on this album too. You've got Jimmy Capps played on the original Easy Lovin', and so did Pig Robbins.
Yep, that's right. Pig, and both of them are still picking.
Yeah, absolutely. I got to meet Pig last year. Billy Sanford is another one that was on that session too. Another great player too.
Yes, Billy is still one of my wonderful friends, and I still keep in touch with Billy and Lloyd Green and some of those guys that we were the A-team of maybe the 70s, you might say.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely, without a doubt. I mean, you're hard pressed to pick up a stack of albums, like I said, and not find the Nashville edition on there. That's a pretty impressive career, my friend. And
well, thank you. You know, the first sessions I did were when I first came to Nashville, and I wanted to do some vocal backing. Of course, I sang with Marty on many of his songs, and but the people said, "Well, Joe, you'll never get into that vocal backing because the Jordanaires and Anita Kerr singers have got it all tied up.
Uh-huh.
You won't make it." Well, guess who started me off? The Jordanaires.
Is that right?
Gordon Stoker would call me for a session when usually I substituted for Hoyt Hawkins, and so I sang on the movie track of Elvis Presley's movie Tickle Me.
Oh, wow.
And that was 10 songs that we did in the studio with the Jordanaires. And that was one of the first sessions that Gordon used me on. And then I also got to sing with Anita Kerr. She used me too. I sang on some Jim Reeves songs with the Anita Kerr singers.
Wow.
Matter of fact, the story behind that is that Louis Nunley, who was Anita's bass singer, was always laughing, always having a good time, and they were on the plane going to a show. I think maybe they played Carnegie Hall, and Jim was on there, and Louis was laughing and everything, and Jim Reeves got the idea. Louis did this on sessions too. He was always having fun. Well, Jim Reeves thought that Louis was laughing at him, and he told Anita, he said, "I don't want that guy on my sessions anymore." Again. Well, so Anita hired me to take Louis's place. Well, I showed up at the session, and Louis, the bass singer, was not there. Well, I'm not a bass singer. I'm a tenor singer. And I told Anita, I said, "Anita, I'm not a bass singer. Louis, where's Louis?" And she said, "Well, you're singing bass today." And she said, "It's all right. I'll arrange it to where you don't have to hit very many low notes, sing a baritone." And she did, and it worked out all right. And later on, Lewis was able to talk to Jim and tell him the truth that he was just a fun-loving guy. He laughed all the time and they made up, and of course Lewis did the rest of the sessions with him. But that's how I got on a Jim Reeves session.
Wow, that's impressive. That's very impressive. I'll tell you what. Well, I know you got a lot of great stories, and I hope we have a chance to talk again, as I would love to talk some more about it. And but right now, I want to play some songs from this wonderful album, Swingtown. This brand new music from Cowboy Joe and Trail Jazz, available at CD Baby, Amazon.com, and you can visit Cowboy Joe at his website, CowboyJoeandtheBabcocks.com. Stellar career, stellar lineup of songs on this album and musicians. And I think you've knocked it out of the park, and I'm going to be playing a lot of these on my shows and my gospel show on Sunday, too. I'll be playing your gospel songs as well. So, Joe, thanks for being on the show. My gosh, I really enjoyed talking with you.
Thank you so much, Scott. Hope it didn't take up too much of your time.
But
I've really enjoyed it.
I've enjoyed it immensely. We could talk a lot longer, and again, I hope we have another chance to talk, because I think we've got a lot of cool stories to.
We sure will. Anytime.
I appreciate that. Cowboy Joe, Babcock, and Trail Jazz. The album is called Swingtown, folks. Pick it up. Listen to some of these great tracks from this stellar album right now as we continue with My Kind of Country here on MKOC Radio. Cowboy Joe, thank you again.
Thank you, Scott.
Well, I was born in Macon, Georgia. I kept my dad in the Macon jail. Well, my daddy said, son, if you keep your hands clean, you won't hear those bloodhounds on your trail. But I fell in with bad companions. We robbed a man up in Tennessee, where the sheriff caught me way up in Nashville. Oh, they locked me up and threw away the key. Well, I washed my hands in muddy water. Well, I washed my hands, but they did come clean. Well, they tried to do like my daddy told me. Well, I must have washed my hands in a muddy stream. Well, I asked that jailer, when's my time up? He said, son, we won't forget. And if you try real hard and keep your hands clean, we may make a good man of you yet. But I could wait and do my sentence. I broke out of the Nashville jail. Now I just crossed that line of Georgia, and I can hear those bloodhounds on my trail. Well, I washed my hands in muddy water. Well, I washed my hands, but they didn't come clean. Well, I tried to do what my daddy told me. Well, I must have washed my hands in a muddy stream. Well, I tried to do what my daddy told me. Well, I must have washed my hands in a muddy stream. make a brand new start. I'll take you to the dance, and I'm hoping there's a chance that there's still a place for me in your heart. Back in the swing of things, back in the swing of things, you and me the way it was before. I'll hold you in my arms and then we'll be back in love again, back in the swing of things once more. Dance and swing, it was a special thing. Do you know that I am still in love with you? They played Faded Love on the